Do you and your partner have toxic patterns, bouts of fighting, shutting down, or tuning out that leave you feeling upset, unheard, and unloved? Although we often expect our intimate relationships to be naturally healthy and smooth, unhealthy dynamics can take over or even be present from the start. But take heart, even destructive habits that seem permanently etched into the fabric of a relationship can be changed when genuine motivation and deep love are at work. Today, I'm joined by a relationship expert who's known for her magic touch in transforming past experiences, especially the not so shiny ones, into pure relationship gold. Today, we'll focus on this listener's real life question. Please help me save my marriage. We've been together for 5 years, married for 3 of them. My husband and I have become trapped in a cycle of fighting over big things like money and stupid things like me texting when we're watching TV. I know it's not just him. I bait him a lot, and I learned this from my dad. Now he wants to start a family, but I don't want kids because our relationship is too toxic. Is there a way we can get out of this loop of nagging and picking at each other? And with that issue as the focus of today's episode, I'm Dr. Carla Marie Manly, and this is Imperfect Love.
Welcome to Imperfect Love with Dr. Carla Marie Manly, psychologist, author, and relationship expert. I'm here to help unravel mysteries and misconceptions about love, relationships, and mental health issues, plus everything in between. Love is complicated, people are imperfect, and relationships surely can be tough. Together, we'll navigate this messy, imperfect space of real life.
Please note, as this episode may contain sensitive information, listener discretion is advised. If you need support, please see the special links in the show notes. Today, I'm joined by a delightful guest, Sanaiyah Gurnamal, who is a love alchemist, relationship coach, and self-love expert. Welcome to the podcast, Sanaiyah. It's a joy to have you with us today.
Thank you so much. I am so honored by your introduction. It was just beautiful. And I want to thank you for having me today.
It's a pleasure to be with you. And this is such a great question of the day. I love it. And I know there's a lot of people who will hear themselves, see themselves in this issue because it's so common and one that we often don't talk about because it brings up shame and embarrassment. But before we dive into that very interesting topic, could you tell our listeners just a little bit about what makes you, you?
What makes me is really my passion, because anyone who meets me notices right away that I'm really passionate about the work I do. I'm really passionate about self-love as being the foundation for our relationship with ourselves. I'm passionate about helping people and also helping people just understand, how important it is to take personal accountability in your life, to understand that there are deeper layers to who we are and that anything is possible when you have the right mindset that allows you to get to your goals. So those are some of the things I'm very passionate about. And it is one of the things that I hear over and over again from other people about how passionate I am about what I believe in and the work I do.
Thank you for that. And passion, I'm a big fan of being passionate about something or many things in life because it's passion that really keeps us going forward. It helps us continue with purpose and helps us show up. So thank you. I really love that introduction. I can see your passion and your energy. So let's set a nice foundation for our listeners. You introduced yourself with one of my favorite words, self-love, self-love. And when we talk about self-love, many people think, it's just loving myself. And yes, it is loving yourself, but it's so much deeper. And certainly a work in progress for all of us. And I think sometimes we can take one step forward in self love and sometimes two steps backward. So, could you tell our listeners just a little bit about what self love means to you?
Yes, that's such a great question to start off with, because I think a lot of people have very different definitions for what self love is, what it looks like, and how to really live their life loving themselves. What I've learned from my many years of searching for that understanding, that deep understanding of what self love is that it's our ability to recognize our own needs. And those needs might be emotional, they might be physical, they might be spiritual as well. But our ability to recognize our own needs and then meet them, not tomorrow, not another day, not when it's convenient, but right now, to respond to our needs and really be there for whatever we need. I think a lot of us have grown up in families and environments where love wasn't freely given, where we had to earn love, where we had to prove ourselves worthy of love, where we might have wanted love for years and not received it. And so being an adult who's learning to love yourself, it's really the journey of giving yourself that love by meeting your needs, by meeting, whatever you need at that given moment in your life. And that in itself is an act of love.
Thank you for that beautiful foundation. And let's dissect that a little bit, because I can imagine in my clinical work, when we're talking, early on in somebody's therapy and they're saying, well, what are you talking about self love? I do love myself. See, I buy myself this and I do that and I love myself. But when we get to the heart of things, often that inner voice that the person grew up with is constantly criticizing them or secretly saying you're not enough, or as you were saying, that we have all of these elements in from childhood forward. Not, I always say, I'm not blaming or shaming parents. There's no use in that. It's about
Absolutely not.
absolutely, it's about looking at what went well, doing more of it, what didn't go well, and either doing less of it or trying to eradicate it. But if we often find as kiddo, we were told to be seen and not heard, or a parent who didn't have very high EQ called us names or criticized us. And all of those things etch their way into who we are. And I love how you approach self love as knowing your needs and meeting them. And generally, the self doesn't have big needs. The self doesn't need a fancy car or a perfect body or a perfect house. The self's needs are generally quite lovely and basic, such as healthy relationships, being heard, being safe, being with people who we trust. And the need for the self is to have good self esteem, to be growing, to evolve. Could you give me your take on what the self really needs? It doesn't have to align with mine. I'd love your own perspective.
Yeah. And I do actually agree with so much of what you said. It's very aligned with my own beliefs. But I do want to address one of the first things you said, which is about I buy myself things. Or, when people say, I love myself, I buy myself things, I get myself a massage, I get my nails done. And I think there is that little bit of confusion because that is self-care, not self-love. Right? Self-love doesn't look like buying yourself fancy gifts or, pampering yourself. Those things are amazing. And I love doing them for myself as well, but they aren't enough to say that I love myself and I am truly dedicated to myself. Definitely being seen, really seeing who you are, being in touch with how you feel, understanding yourself. Okay. And committing to the things that are important to you, such as your time, your energy. So drawing proper boundaries, these are all different aspects of self-love. I heard you say quite a few of them as well. So definitely, we share that approach to self-love. I think also what is important to highlight is that what we want for ourselves may often be at odds with other people. And so learning to prioritize yourself and choosing yourself, even though you want to please other people, you want to make other people happy, you care about other people too. It's important to be able to choose yourself first and say, well, I can show up for what I need and still be able to give to others. But as you've probably heard that old adage that you can't pour from an empty cup, right? So you have to be able to kind of fulfill yourself first. You need to make sure you have energy for yourself before you can give that to other people. You have to strap yourself in first before you are good to anybody else who's struggling in their own life, right? So we always have to see ourselves first before other people without feeling like that's a selfish thing. So it isn't, I only care about myself and nobody else matters. It's more of this understanding that I have to be in a good place. I have to be full of energy and full of love myself to share any of that with other people. And to really be able to share that with other people properly, I have to be full of it. I have to be full of love.
I agree with you 100%. And I like the part where you talked about not confusing purchasing things with self-love. And I want to loop back to that for just a moment because it is so important. Sometimes people buy themselves something thinking it's self-love and feel worse afterward. They get that initial dopamine hit. Oh, I bought myself a nice dress, or I bought myself a sports car, or I bought myself a great dinner, only to find that after that hit wears off, they feel actually worse. And that's why it's so critical to have that self-love first, because self-love then tends to be more in a balanced place of, oh, well, maybe I want that, but I don't need it, so maybe I'll forgo it. Or maybe I want that and a massage would feel really good because I'm tired. But our expectations are shifted when we're coming from a place of what would feel good to us rather than trying to fill our soul that is aching and hungering with things, because the soul doesn't really care about things. Self-love does not care about things. So let's continue now. And you said so many wonderful things about self-love and self-care, so we can just hold those in their own place because they are so important when we pivot to relationships.
Yeah.
If we are in relationships where our self-love is not strong, it's like being on this very tenuous tightrope where we can get easily pulled, down into whatever's below. Could you talk a little bit about, when we look at the listener's question, where this sounds like a once promising romantic partnership, they did get married after all, has really degraded over time into dynamics that, at least from the individual who wrote in, from their side, they're not happy at all.
Yeah.
What are some basic tips that you would offer that we can first kind of lay as a foundation for this?
So first of all, I wanted to really thank you for bringing up dopamine, because that is a really important thing to also talk about. Our world today has become so distracted that we're constantly looking for these dopamine hits, these feel-good moments, like buying ourselves something or, giving ourselves that massage and so on. And those are, again, very, there's nothing wrong with them. But what we're doing is we're neglecting the hormones that actually matter when it comes to relationships, which are serotonin, oxytocin, which is great for bonding, and endorphins, which is something that you can trigger through other activities like exercise. But the idea is that we are so focused on the dopamine hit that we forget that our body also needs serotonin, it needs endorphins, it needs oxytocin. And a lot of these hormones come from activities where we are connecting with other people. And this brings me to the person who wrote in and their marriage, the issue with, that's challenging their marriage today. And clearly there's a lack of communication, bonding, safety, and joy in the relationship. And it isn't necessarily just a problem in the relationship. I do believe from all the work that I've done with over 5,000 clients at this point, one-on-one, is a lot of this has to do with their own relationship with themselves, which probably is going through its own individual challenges. And that is coming into their relationship and getting in the way of a healthy, loving connection between the two of them. When I work with couples, well, let me actually say that correctly. I usually work with one person in the couple. I almost rarely do couples counseling or coaching, mainly because all it takes is one person to start to work on themselves for their experience of the other person to change. So if I have a client who's often the woman in the relationship comes to me and says, Sanaiyah, I am really struggling with this relationship. All we do is fight all the time. It's really toxic. I go back to, well, where have you seen this pattern in your life before? Because it's often not in the current relationship. It's something they have seen from the past. And you mentioned it, your listener who wrote in said one of the things she learned, the baiting, was something she learned from her father. And so what is happening is often our behaviors, our reactions, and what we anticipate in our relationships, especially the loving ones, come from childhood patterns and dysfunctions, things we grew up with, things we saw our parents do. If they fought all the time, we end up fighting all the time. If one person cheated on the other, we grow up, attracting people who will betray us, who will cheat on us, who will make us feel insecure in a relationship. So we're often just repeating patterns that we've grown up with, we've learned before, we've experienced before. And so it doesn't necessarily become about, my client and their partner. It becomes the story about my client's life and what they have constantly experienced in the form of negative emotions in their relationships. And all they do is they keep recreating that. It could be with their partner, it could be in other aspects of their life. So often, when you look at the bigger picture, you zoom out, you see all these different isolated events, and then you connect the dots and you're like, it's not really different and isolated. It's things that have been happening over and over again for a very long time.
Absolutely. And for our listeners to realize that where there's a desire to create change, you can create change. It's extremely helpful if you're in a partnership, if the other person wants to change too. But I agree with you. Our patterns are formed early on in life. Our attachment style is formed by 18 months of age generally. And when we think about how much time we spend with our caregivers, concentrated time, they are generally all we know, or most of what we know, for the first 3 years of life. And then they're present as we go to grades, kindergarten, grade school, elementary. And for those first generally 17 to 18 years of life, below our conscious radar, we are picking up the body language, the oral back and forth. We are picking up the dynamics. So of course our brains are going to be wired in certain ways because that's what we're picking up. And I agree. I love that the individual who wrote in is already aware that this part can be attributed to something that they learned from dad, because it's those insights, as small as they might seem, those are the gateways. Those are what allow us to have the insight, because insight is critical. And once we have the insight, then we can choose to change. So back to you. I love that you already set the foundation with Okay, let's create the awareness of where the patterns are coming from. That's step one. Okay, what's step two?
Okay. So before I go into step two, I want to actually address something you said, which was also so important. I love that you're just, totally helping me in explaining what I want to say as well, because there's a lot of alignment in the work that we do. So one of the things that I want to address is how important it is for the other person to be willing to change. Now, in my work, what I found is the other person doesn't have to actually actively change, but just be open to change. And here's why. Our relationships are interactive. We aren't in a relationship just as ourselves. We interact. So, for example, if I see my husband in the morning and he says, good morning, and then he says something to me, I can interpret it any way I want. I might interpret it as being rude, or I might say, I might be fine with the way he said something. But what the other person says can often trigger different reactions in us. And so we're constantly reacting and interacting to the other person. And what might feel kind of, hurtful to somebody else may be something that is worth laughing about with another relationship, right? So it's how we're constantly interpreting different behaviors, events, communication from other people that actually determines the quality of our relationships and how we will react. And the key difference is either we will respond to the communication or the interaction, or we will react. If the relationship is great, we often just respond, and it's a beautiful, loving relationship between two people. But when we're constantly reacting because we feel attacked, we feel threatened, we feel resentful. So there's all these negative emotions that we're carrying from previous interactions with that person that build up over time. Then you get the exact kind of situation that your listener describes in her message. So step two is really looking back at your childhood. I guess that was kind of step one as well, but going deeper into it, really trying to understand, what are the events that have shaped me into the person I am today? What do I believe about love? What do I expect out of love? So examining our beliefs, our perspective on love. Is it positive? Is it what I want it to be? Or am I just, repeating these very faulty patterns, notions, understanding of love in my own life? And it's happening all on the unconscious level, right? So we aren't really aware we're doing it, but it shows up in our behaviors. And often we're trying to protect ourselves. So we are repeating behaviors that protect us, but end up pushing other people away, or end up triggering other people, or eliciting the kind of behavior we actually don't want. Our goal is simply to protect ourselves from what happened in the past, and we're anticipating it in the future relation or in the present relationship. So a very good example is if you had a father who was an alcoholic. You grew up with that. And you realized as a child that you had to be really quiet around him. You had to tiptoe. Okay. You couldn't express yourself because if you did, he might, react. He might get angry. He might have a meltdown, something or the other. So you learned that you had to kind of shrink in your relationships to avoid conflict. Now, you might go into your adult relationship the same way, even though you are not with a partner who's an alcoholic. And just this lack of being able to communicate, the lack of being yourself, because you're still reacting from the childhood experience of having to, protect yourself from your father's, outburst as
I
an alcoholic.
agree so much, Sanaiyah. And you made me think when you were talking about the childhood piece that in my fourth book, The Joy of Imperfect Love, I talk about starting with that foundation of going, it sounds so simplistic. What is your definition of love? And people might say, oh, love is being cuddled, love is being adored, whatever it might be. But if we go back to childhood, the definition of what we learned as a child, if a parent, using your example of an alcoholic parent, if the parent's alcoholic and walks in the door and hits you, and that parent is supposed to love you, well, love equals being hit. If the parent walks in the door and criticizes you, or you're trying your best to work on something, but all you get is criticism, and you look up at this big parental figure because you're just tiny and the parent is, God or goddess, and they're criticizing you, then you're like, oh, love is criticism. And if the parent ignores you, oh, love is being ignored. Love is stonewalling, whatever it might be. Love is gaslighting. So, your brain is forming. It's growing like wildfire when you're young. And so you're taking all this in. Then you grow up, you may be different with your friends because friends don't necessarily trigger, as you said, those intimate relationship defenses that pop up. So now you're in the adult relationship. We're thinking of our listener. They might be, in a situation with their husband and they're poking, they're triggering, they're doing all of the little things, maybe criticizing. And why? Not because they're broken, not because they're hopeless. Clearly, the individual wants to create change, but because that's the patterns they learned in intimate relationships. And they're just carrying them forward. So I love how you've set this up now for change. We have the foundation, we have the understanding, we have the awareness of the definitions of what am I bringing in this silent script that's running the show. Okay, now what do we do?
Okay. So the next thing to do is understand what your particular love block is. So I have found that when it comes to love and relationships in particular, we have specific, you could say, personalities or expressions of ourselves that can be categorized into 5 different types. Okay. And so I created this quiz because I would see the same patterns over and over again with my clients. And I figured, well, if I could just really put this together and simplify it for my client, what would it look like? And so I created this quiz that helps people understand what is their block when it comes to love. Okay. And depending on what your block is, the path to healing, the path to overcoming that will look a little bit different. So that was the goal of identifying the block, is to understand what does this particular type of situation need, right? So if you grew up in, let's say, a family where you weren't valued, you weren't made to feel important, you were one of those children where you were taught you had to be, quiet, you could be seen but not heard, you felt very unwanted, unloved, you might grow up to have some challenges when it comes to confidence and self-esteem and self-worth. And when that shows up in a relationship, it could show up like people pleasing. You constantly feel like you need to earn the other person's love.
Is that the love block? So is that one of the 5 love blocks? Is people?
One of the 5 love blocks is people pleasing. And so your understanding of love is that it must be earned.
Mm-hmm.
You had to earn love as a child, for example. You had to get good grades, or you had to help out. You had to take care of, certain chores in order for your mother to say, you're a great child, or I love you. So you grew up thinking that you had to constantly please yourself, please other people.
Please others. I got it. Okay.
To be loved, right? And then what happens is you end up attracting partners who you feel either you have to change yourself to make them happy or to make them love you, or you constantly are vying for their attention or love in other ways. So you're constantly people pleasing in that relationship. Except what happens is you end up losing your identity because so you're so focused on the other person. And as time goes on in the relationship, the partner stops valuing you, stops seeing you as someone with their own identity because you've actually sacrificed all of that for them. So
Makes sense.
you taught them that you're not important, that your needs don't matter, that you're not the priority, they are. And they got used to it, right? We train our partners how to love us.
Oh,
and if you
do we ever?
we ever, right? And so if you trained your partner that your needs don't matter, eventually you start getting really resentful because they don't prioritize you, right? And you're constantly exhausted of just pleasing them and doing things for them and not getting anything back. Okay. It worked in the beginning because that's how you started the relationship, and they got used to it as well. They got used to not having to give love back or, make you feel special. You allowed it. And so time goes on and you get more and more resentful. And that turns into all the squabbling, all the conflict. And then you start getting either depressed or you start feeling unloved, not good enough. But then you already felt all of those things in your childhood with your parents. So all you're doing is repeating that. And it feels so much worse because it's not the first time that you're experiencing these emotions. It's just, kind of the same experience being added on top of the old experiences you're carrying from childhood that were never healed.
Absolutely. And it's generally, I've discovered, very much worse because in childhood, we didn't choose the parents, we didn't choose the family. But people often say to me, how could I have chosen this? How could I have chosen this partner who was going when they start to become aware of the cycle? And I help them realize, no, you chose, but you didn't consciously choose. No one goes into a relationship, or at least no one I've met yet, who says, I want to be criticized or harmed just the way my parents did it. It's that I believe an unconscious desire that this is broken in the same way. And that gives us the window to healing because on some level we get that it's broken in the same way. And that same knowing also realizes that it's a potential for healing that wound. So, all right, what's love block number 2?
Okay, so we've got the people pleaser, we've got the commitment phobe, and that was my love block. So it's one of my favorite ones because you keep blaming other people for having the commitment issue. You think you attract emotionally unavailable partners. Okay, you're stuck in relationships where it feels like they're not all in, they're not as invested as you are. And you think that they are the problem. But the twist in the story is if you're the one who keeps attracting the same kind of partner or situation, it's not them, honey, it's you, right? So for me, it was just this big moment when I realized that every single partner I dated was someone who had this emotional baggage and they couldn't commit. And I had kind of glorified the whole situation and kind of made excuses for why they couldn't commit. But the truth was they couldn't commit over and over again. And then I started to notice that these men I was dating who couldn't commit to me would end up committing to the person after me. And that's when I said, wait a minute, it's not their issue. It must be mine because I'm the common denominator in every single relationship that looks the same. And that was just the most liberating realization that it was me and not them. Because if it was me, I could actually do something about it. So the commitment phobe is, the personality who thinks everybody else is the problem and they have the commitment issue, but it's actually you. And for the commitment phobe, you want a loving, fulfilling relationship, but you're actually also running away from it because you've seen relationships, your parents, maybe your sibling, your own experiences, your friends, where love wasn't as pretty as it seemed, right? You realize pretty soon that it wasn't just unicorns and rainbows. It was hard work. It was a lot of pain. It was difficult. So part of you wants to protect yourself from that.
Makes sense. It's where avoidant attachment comes from. Okay. So let's move to number 3. What is the third love block?
Runaway Bride. So Runaway Bride is based on a Julia Roberts movie where she's about to like walk down the altar. I think it was George Clooney in the movie. But I remember that movie specifically because she was there. She was right there. She was going to marry the guy. And then right before she's walking down the aisle, she gets on a horse and she runs. And that is a classic runaway bride situation where every time you're about to take the next step, you're about to get closer in the relationship. Maybe you're going to move in together. Maybe you are going to get married, right? Every time the relationship gets to the next step, you start to get cold feet and you bolt. And that may look a little different for everyone. It's not necessary that you'll walk out of the relationship, but you might start sabotaging the relationship. You might create fights over things that aren't really that important, but you basically find ways to push the person away because you don't want them to get too close, because ultimately you're afraid they're going to hurt you. So you'll stay in the relationship, but you're constantly in the space of, I need to protect myself from
flight
next
mode.
for me.
Yes, very much that flight mode.
Fight mode.
Yes, fight, FIGHT, where
Yeah,
it's used as a defense mechanism, but it's also flight at the
it
same
is
time.
flight.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's flight, but it's flight mode masquerading as fight because the response is a fight mode, but it's really deep down the flight mode. I want to run away from this situation, right? And it's very interesting because you'll constantly, often behave badly in the relationship with your partner. But it's not because you want to intentionally hurt them. You just want to protect yourself from being on the receiving end of that.
Absolutely. It's that fear of vulnerability. Again, generally learned in childhood. So we can rebrand that one just for a moment, just to make it runaway bride and groom, so that we can see it applies to men and it applies to any gender. Okay. And what is number 4?
So number 4 is the caretaker.
Mm.
This is the child that probably had to take on a lot of responsibility for a number of reasons. You could have had a mother who was incapacitated as a mother. She could have been going through mental health issues. She could be working all the time, taking care of the family. And then the child had to step in to probably raise the siblings, take care of the house. Basically, the child becomes a stand-in for the parent and takes on a lot of responsibility that they didn't need or they shouldn't have had to take on, but the situation required it. So they grow up becoming the responsible one, constantly taking care of other people. And that becomes almost the sense of worth, is if I take care of other people, then I am important. I have value. I am loved. And that becomes the pattern. So you attract partners that you have to take care of. That might be, a situation where the partner is struggling with something financially, addictions, just different challenges in their own life. And essentially your entire relationship is about focusing on them and taking care of them, neglecting your own needs, neglecting your own desires. Sometimes for a caretaker love block, you stay single because the thought is, I have too many responsibilities. There's no space in my life for a partner.
Yeah, got it. All right. What's number 5?
Memory chaser. The memory chaser. So this is where it feels like you're stuck in the past on an ex, on a relationship that didn't work out. So you have this whole idea in your head, the one that got away. And so you're always looking over your shoulder at the past, at what didn't work out. You've put that whole relationship on a pedestal. So it looks like the perfect relationship, even though there was a very good reason why it didn't work out. You just don't want to see it because in your head, it was the perfect relationship, right? So you can't move forward because you're still stuck in the past. You keep comparing any new partner to the old one. And so you're kind of stuck in the space where, the future looks pretty bleak because you missed that one chance, the ship that sailed. And so you're just caught in this whole loop of, chasing memories that aren't even real. And so you don't move forward. You don't let new love in. You don't give anyone else a chance.
And I've seen that one, and I've seen that dynamic really haunt current relationships because they might think, oh, that person was perfect because they loved me more, they had a better body, or they had more money, or whatever it was. But we're looking at that, or they got drunk with me and this person doesn't drink, or they were okay with me smoking and this person doesn't. Yet we're looking at that, all of that in a silo, not realizing how that relationship would have evolved or what that person would look like 20 years later or 30 years later. So you're right. Again, we're back to self-protection on this type. So when we take all of this back to the question of the day, it sounds as if, not really sure what's happening on the husband's side, but it sounds as if perhaps the wife is in that pattern of the runaway bride, where she's using the criticism learned in childhood, carried forward, to create constant upheaval in the relationship, not doing it consciously. That gives her reasons to get on the horse and gallop off into the sunset emotionally. Even if she's staying, there's this galloping off, leaving the relationship. And I agree with you. It is often a defense against deeper love and vulnerability. And so I know we don't have much time left, so I'd love to get in a few really important tips that will help this individual realize, wait a second, if I start using some of these tools, I can start creating shifts in my relationship. I can share them with my partner, or I can just model them for my partner, or I can just model them and embrace them myself and create a sense of ease in myself, which may create a change in the partner's dynamics as well. We don't know. But what would you offer?
So, a couple of things that I want to share. First of all, you did say runaway bride, which makes complete sense with this listener, but it could be also a memory chaser because they might have a relationship in the past that they hold as the ideal and they're not getting that in the current relationship. It could also be the people pleasing love block because they're constantly doing things for the partner and the partner is not sharing anything back. So it could be a couple of different things. We need a little bit more information. So if I were the listener or anyone else tuned in, the first thing I would do was take the quiz, is to really understand what's going on with me. The second tip I want to share is to go back and do what I call as a relationship inventory. Look at all your relationships. What do they have in common? What did you feel in every relationship? And my goal for that exercise is help you become aware at what you've been creating and what you've been attracting. Because ultimately, what I would say to the listener who wrote in is not to focus as much on what the partner is doing wrong, but focus on what is it that you're doing to invite this response from them. What is it that you are sending out in your communication with your partner that is getting the kind of behavior that you don't want from them? What if you changed your strategy? What if you became more vulnerable? What if you started asking for what you want? So it really depends on what their love block is. Because if they're the people pleaser, I would say ask for what you want instead of just expecting them to give it to you. Like clearly say, this is what I need. Do you think you can give this to me? Because if you did, it would make me feel this way. So what kind of conversation I would invite you to have with your partner to kind of change the dynamics would be a little bit different depending on what your block is. But really just understanding what your role in your relationship is, or what your role, like if you're single, what is the role you are playing in the people you're attracting? If you are married, what are you protecting against? And that is something that is very particular, very connected to what block you're operating from. Now, in the work I do, I do a lot of healing on the emotional wounds that each of us carry, whether it's a father wound, mother wound, childhood dysfunction, that we have to clear, pain, trauma, inner child work. So I really focus on the first part of what created these blocks in the first, and to start with, what are the experiences? What are the events that shaped you to have this kind of block? And then after releasing that, changing all of these different inputs that have resulted in this kind of output situation in our life. We work on that, so that I call that the releasing the past aspect. And then I work on building the confidence, self-esteem, new beliefs about love, new notions, new expectations. And then finally, in the third part of the work I do is really attracting what you want in your relationships, whether you are in an existing relationship or you are single and looking for love. So it really is a three-step process of releasing, rebuilding, and then attracting.
100% agreed with you, because that process allows, when we look at this listener's question, she becomes aware of where it came, all these patterns came from. And like anything, we might not see ourselves in strictly insecure attachment or strictly secure, or necessarily in one of these 5 styles or any style. We may see bits and pieces. The idea is to reflect on the past to see where the patterns came from. Be gentle as you decide what you want, and what's happening. And then play step by step by step, because patterns don't change overnight. So realizing, for the person who wrote in, if I'm tending to criticize my husband, wonder what happens if I make a pact to myself to notice how many times I do that a day. Just to notice. I just want to notice how often I do it. Because when we notice, we start creating awareness. Then maybe step 2 would be, what happens if I don't criticize? When I feel that coming up and I just don't criticize. I wonder how that will change things. So if we have this awareness of what's happening, allow ourselves a nice pause, like, maybe I don't have to criticize him for leaving his underwear on the floor. I can just let them be and see what happens. And just allowing that slow and steady change, notice, and that's often the hardest part, because we want to, neurobiologically, we're hardwired to dive in and criticize or stonewall. But what happens if we slowly but surely try to stop? Our brains are going to come up with new patterns, and we just want to watch and see what new patterns come alive, and lean into the patterns that come alive, lean into the ones that seem filled with love and connection. And it will, as you said earlier, it will bring up sense of vulnerability, a sense of something new, maybe some fear and anxiety. And that's okay, because if you're doing something with love, the outcome's ultimately going to be a really good one. Sanaiyah, thank you so much for joining us today. Where can our listeners find you?
Thank you. So my website is SanaiyahGurnamal.com. And I also am on all social media channels at Sanaiyah Gurnamal, Instagram in particular, YouTube, TikTok. I'm pretty much everywhere. So feel free to drop me a DM to reach out. I also want to invite your listeners to take my Love Blocks quiz. And that is SanaiyahGurnamal.com/love-blocks-quiz. And I know you'll link it in the show notes.
It'll be in the show notes
for them. But I wanted to add just one quick note. I know you said that patterns don't change overnight. And I agree with you that we have to kind of change our behavior if we're doing it on our own. and it will take time. So definitely we want our listeners to know that, this is something that takes a commitment and dedication to yourself. Having said that, in the work that I do with my clients, I've found that when you do the healing, your patterns do change overnight. So when I work with my clients, we change patterns in every session, and we change how we feel, we change behaviors, we change what we attract. So I do also want to invite you to consider the fact that you aren't really limited by it. It doesn't have to take time. It doesn't have to be difficult. It can be changed. And sometimes when you're working with someone with a very clear goal of what you want, things can change overnight. And that is really my experience with the people that I work with. So just wanted to share that and give you a little note of inspiration before we end.
Absolutely. I agree with you. There are times where we can change a behavior actually in the moment. We can say, I am never going to have apples again. Often, though, the trap that people get into is they want the relationship to change overnight, or they want to lose 10 pounds overnight, or they want to start exercising forever and have that be. But we want to realize that patience is key and perseverance is key. And especially when there's someone else in the dynamic, it's not uncommon for us to take a step backward after we've taken a step forward when we get triggered. If there's unresolved trauma and all sorts of things, it will definitely take time, and we need to have grace with ourselves around that. Otherwise, we'll fear we were a failure. So thank you so much, Sanaiyah. I greatly appreciate your time. And to our listeners, thank you for sharing your time and energy and your journey with us. And this is Imperfect Love.
Thanks so much for sharing your time with me today. Remember, you have the power to transform your life and love fearlessly, if imperfectly, and it's my privilege to help you along the way. You can find more life-changing content, including my books and other podcast episodes, at drcarlamanly.com. Feel free to submit your own confidential questions through my website. I'll do my very best to include your issue on a future episode. If you found this podcast helpful, please subscribe and leave a review. Until we connect again, this is Dr. Carla Marie Manly wishing you oceans of blessings and love. Please note, this podcast is psychoeducational in nature and is not intended to replace formal mental health support. Please contact your healthcare provider or emergency hotline if you need psychiatric care. And, as always, please take good care of your amazing, wonderful self.